It will be held at Second Ponce de Leon Baptist. They graciously offer a space, purposeful activities for the individuals that are attending, everything from art to exercise to music to talks about various subject matters, various kinds of stimulating activities that engage them. In addition to that, we're providing support services for the caregiver, family member, everything from just a support group to additional services if they are having really real specific challenges that they need help with. We can connect them with professionals that can help them with those difficulties. To participate in the program, it will be $50 a day. The going rate right now, if you have to hire a caregiver in the Buckhead area, is $20 to $25 an hour, and it's usually a minimum of 4 hours a day. So it's what happens with families that have a family member with these difficulties is that you try to put off hiring outside caregivers as long as you can, because you never know how many years this is going to go on. I had this experience with my own husband, and insurance doesn't pay for any of this until maybe if you have a long-term care policy, it pays for replacement toward the end of the illness. But early stages of the illness, family members are very cautious about spending money because they don't know how long it's going to last. It was 8 years for us. It's not unusual. I do a support group here at Peachtree Road. It's not unusual for families to go on with this for 10 to 20 years. So we're feeling like, well, the congregations along Peachtree Road came to this because so many of the congregations are experiencing this problem within their own membership and recognize the need for it. It's specifically called a congregational respite because that is a form of respite that the state of Georgia recognizes. It is a respite program that is formed by congregations. The only paid employee is the director. All the other staff are volunteers who are trained. There's usually a ratio of 1 staff or 1 volunteer to every 2 participants. But there's a very successful program that operates out in Lawrenceville. There are a couple of other smaller programs in the Atlanta area, and there's a very successful program in Montgomery that has gotten the University of Alabama School of Neurology so excited that they've gotten the Montgomery program to start 2 or 3 programs in the Birmingham area because they see how much it helps the individuals that participate in the programs. Questions?
Well, you mentioned the other day, the participants basically have to be ambulatory, so you're talking low-level cognitive difficulties
That's
or
right.
assisted living.
This is what's called a social program. This is not a medical model program as the state recognizes. So anybody that participates in our program has to be ambulatory. Now, ambulatory means that they could be in a wheelchair, but they've got to be able to transfer themselves from the wheelchair to a chair and from the wheelchair to the toilet. We can't do that physically ourselves. Also, they have to, if they take medication, it's required that they have to take the medication. We cannot administer medications. We can remind them if they've got the medications in an envelope in their pocket. We can say, oh, it's 12 o'clock, it's time for your medication, let's go get some water. But we can't administer it. And they have to be able to toilet themselves. We can't provide that service. Now, an individual can come with a caregiver if they're not completely independent. We will allow a caregiver to come with them.
So, big aspect of this is socialization, just so they're
Absolutely.
outside of the house and they're in with other people.
Yes. Yes.
So, I mean, how many people do you expect to have in the program as, I don't know what you refer to them as, you tell me what you refer to them as.
Well, we're calling it Club RCA, and these are members of the club.
Okay.
The state requirement is it's a maximum of 25 a day. We are probably gonna cap it at 20 a day, because if you've got 20 participants, that means you're gonna have 10 volunteers. 30 people in a room, it's much larger than this room, but 30 people in a room with somebody that's got cognitive difficulties starts to get challenging for them. It's too much distraction, it's too much activity. So we will probably cap it at 20 participants a day. Initially, we're gonna, until we see how much demand there is, initially, we're gonna say they can only come 1 day a week, but we hope to be able to increase it so that they can come at least 2 days a week, because what we've seen in other programs is that they benefit much more if they can come multiple times a week.
So you gather up the people and bring them to a central location?
The caregiver, the family caregiver brings them. There's a drop-off area on this side of Second Ponce. They can actually pull up to the door. We will have greeters that assist the participant getting out of the car and takes them down to the room where all the activities take place. And then at the end of the day, there'll be a volunteer that will escort them out to the pickup area. So the family caregiver never even has to get out of the car. All they do is just pull up, drop them off, come back, pick them up. So that really gives the caregiver almost 5 hours that they've got to care for themselves and take care of things that they can't do when they're taking care of their loved one. I really ask you for 4 things. 1, if you're interested in volunteering, the director's name and contact information is on the back. We're looking for volunteers that anywhere from a couple of hours to the full-time period. There are activities that we need help with on the side, not just coming every day to work directly with the participants. 2, if you know anybody that you think would qualify to be a participant, again, contact the director or have them contact the director, and they can go through the interview process. We're also looking for donations. This is a nonprofit, and the more money we can raise, the less we have to charge the participants. And we ask for your prayers. It's a challenging program to start, but there's a great need for it. So we will welcome the prayers so that we can do everything we can to be successful.
So you've got obviously a volunteer-heavy structure right now, and what do you think it's going to cost to deliver this? If you were at 20 for 2 days a week?
Well, we've done, our financial projections show that if we have a full house, if we have 20 a day, the program will pay for itself. It will support itself at $50 a day. Now, what we'd really like to do is be able to have enough funding beyond that so that for some participants, we can do something like a match program. You know, every day you pay for, we'll pay for a day. But as I said, this is a very costly illness, and it goes on for so long that family members are very fearful about putting out any more money than they have to because of the unexpected costs that are going to come in the future.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for a few minutes of your time.
Thank you.
Yep, yep.
Marcel and Carol, Juicy Girls. You know her.
Blind, you were the caregiver.
See,
You're the director.
She's a flying
Yeah. NYU Medical School, got to say they won't charge tuition.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, it's just cognitive.
Was that an
On the news, they said you had to kind of reduce the debt. I don't know. You got to use surveys out of that or whatever. Right there, $5,000
Yeah. I've been doing a lot. Sorry, it's like going on vacation. They're not gonna charge you. You still charge for NYU.
I stopped when they started doing this. saw the little 30-second news snippet. Good call, Scott. Go home.
I got up
She might not be looking at NYU. Don't fuck that.
I think they're gonna put, probably.
the difference between us.
Done with say no thanks to you. Oh, I wish it was.
Yeah, you're right. I'll start doing that. That would be a great
That part takes 15 minutes on the internet.
That's true.
I'm giving other people a chance to live in prayer. Excuse me? I'm giving other people a chance to live in prayer, okay?
Where is that?
Could you go draw some stuff, or the youngest one wants to be watching for a while? Like 10:01.
I know, it's kind of crazy. What? I actually have to read.
All right, guys, we ready to go? We'll the late start. Hey, Chester, would you do it for us this morning, and then next week we'll start passing it around? Okay. Thank you, Chester. You're welcome. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for waking us up this morning and getting us here safely. Please bless our discussion. In Jesus' name, amen. Chester said he's going to give everybody else the opportunity to open, so y'all be ready next week.
Thanks for sharing, Jerry. We'll let Chester.
We'll let him do that.
Before we start, is Hayes gonna explain himself?
Yes, he needs to give an account.
I have a meeting at 7:45, so I'm just trying to squeeze in a little Bible study before.
Last week, we didn't look at James because we did, I thought, an extraordinary session. Tom, wasn't that amazing? I thought it was very, really relevant and apropos for all of us. And it made me think a good deal about that whole process. And as you know, funerals are windows of reality. They are windows that often people don't want to go through, because it reminds them of their own mortality, and they are often very uncomfortable in situations like that, as you can well imagine. It's a memento mori. Remember, you're going to die is what that means. And so, generally speaking, within 2 days, they can get over that and go on to business as usual. But it's an interesting thought that it causes us to realize. And I had just remember, I had this strange collection of dreams last night about this guy. Apparently, I was going to be executed, and so I had a day in order to I had one more day. So it was an interesting thing, my connections with people that I ran into and so forth. Very different orientation. I don't know what that was about. Do you ever have crazy dreams like that?
Yeah, that would agree.
Oh, oh, it's real. You ever have flying dreams?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Love that.
Yeah, they didn't last long enough. Those were all to look forward to.
I like flying dreams.
Yeah.
I used to figure out how I could go up, down.
That's what I tried to do.
Oh, I dig those dreams.
Yeah. It was through force of will that I could make my heart, make myself go higher.
Oh, I got to the point where I could feel, oh, here comes a flying dream. And it was just,
Yeah,
yeah. That's like a common thing, obviously.
apparently so. Yeah. How about falling dreams?
I had one.
Any of you hit?
I was falling into what I guess was hell. It was like black with a little red dot at the bottom. What happened?
What happened? I have hit.
What do you remember?
Whoa.
Yeah, I hit. You
must have bounced.
I do, but it's both painful and pleasant at the same time. I bounce, but it is painful, but I survive. So, you know, it's contrary to the Gary Larson thing where he has, what's the thing? I can find it for you if you want, but it's, guy, he forgets the wake up before you fall rule. And you see him on his bed and he's flattened. A well-known wake up before you fall. I actually hit. I don't know why that is. But I also have these rapture dreams where I'm kind of going this rapture. You know, Jesus comes to take you into His presence, and as He said, I'm going to come and take you up. And I get about halfway up there, you know, and then I kind of hover. So, you know, sometimes I don't. Strange stuff. I haven't had one of these dreams in quite a while. You're shaking your head.
No, I'm just thinking about the brain.
How strange the brain is.
Yes.
The brain or his brain?
Anybody's brain is.
Has it changed any of your priorities? Has it made you think and go, oh, I need to implement and be nicer to this people, or I need to do more of this and less of that? And
Well, last night's dream was actually an interesting thing because it gave me a perspective on treasuring each person you encountered, is what it was. It was actually very strong connections, knowing the brevity of the time. An interesting thought. And if you were, for example, in a context, let's say that you found yourself in a place where it was very likely that all of you were going to get killed, or, you know, what would happen with strangers? You see, if you knew that that within an hour or less that you would all die, I think it would accelerate connections in some way. It was a strange thought. But I don't know. The brain is a strange thing, and we don't think of dreams as compensatory. They're not. Most of mine are things that are kind of negative. Like I'm always late for speaking engagements now. Used to be I was late for class or late for the final exam or whatever. Now I get there just before the last person left, just after the last person left when I get there. And I'm usually in my underwear as well, so, or if not naked. So these are great dreams. And why do I have these dreams? Well, you know, you all.
You're anxious.
I don't know.
Perfect anxiety.
Didn't you always have those dreams when you were in school about being late for
But, I
class?
mean, it's an anxiety dream.
They are, but
The one
I
I
don't know
still,
why we have them though.
the one I still have now is that I've got a final.
You're
exam.
anxious about
Your
something.
anxiety manifests.
You're anxious about something.
Must be
Comes up
anxious.
at the
Is that,
final
is that
exam.
your analysis, boy?
It is, my professional analysis.
professional
based on
analysis?
my years of training.
Maybe I need to,
That's a real estate professional.
Years of experience.
time in the couch, huh?
I won't charge you for the first meeting.
Okay, thank you.
You know, I was watching this Civil War documentary,
Yeah.
and it was Battle of Gettysburg and the Battle of Cold Harbor was what I watched, and they were just crazy slaughter. There were
Crazy
actually
slaughter.
men that were speaking to their friends, documented that this is my day, I'm gone. I want you to give this to my wife. They actually felt they were gonna die. So that's pretty, it's like, they knew it. And they gave pictures and wrote letters and gave it to their friends. They felt their friend was gonna live. I mean, that was,
There it is.
yeah, there it is, you're right, Ace.
He's actually referring to this.
Oh, okay.
Dreaming
Close,
he's falling, Jerry forgets the well-known always wake up before you land rule. See, he's all flattened now. And then the other one I like is this one here. This is a common medieval nightmare. Look at the guy. He's naked, of course. He's naked. He's got a wooden sword and he's got a garbage can lid. Common medieval
He's in
nightmare.
trouble.
The guy had it down, didn't he?
Yeah.
It's probably what you would dream, that I'm naked in battle and I'm ill-equipped. So the guy was onto many.
So you have your Far Side cartoons thematically sorted.
Sure I do. Yeah,
Your
of course, yeah, it's under my humor folder first of all. And then under humor, I'm gonna go to Far Side, and then under Far Side, I have my scans, and that's where I put them in folders, you see. And then I created these Far Side presentations based upon selections from them. My best ones, the full-blown thing with about 300 of them, various variations of it, you see, so much more than you want to know. So,
Your rabbit holes have rabbit holes.
They do.
That's the quote.
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
It's like very complex Swiss cheese.
Complex Swiss cheese. What does that mean?
And yet you can find your way through it.
I can always navigate myself back. I've trained myself to be able to go from one to back and work my way right back to where I was. Gary, a delight to see you.
Come on. How y'all doing?
Good. Come up to the table. We have a seat for you right there. Yeah.
Might be quoting Daniel, is what I was.
Look at that. Immortalized.
I hope it's not the last supper.
Seinfeld fans like that Seinfeld episode.
He said, have a seat at the table with the last supper. I hope it's not the last
You
supper.
seen Mosley cover too?
Actually, my friend Steve Lawson has this one as his stone. I think it says, if you're planning to invite us for dinner, it's too late. Strange. He had these bizarre kind of wacky things. My friend Ed Dudley wanted to put, I don't know if he actually did, he said he wanted to put it on his marker. He ain't here. He's not here. Which is a nice idea, because that's not where he is.
Better than, see, I told you I was sick.
That's true. That's true. And indeed, I have a collection of things, odd things on tombstones. And there are some really bizarre.
I know. I'm getting whipped up because I gotta go to this.
No, I haven't. I realize that I'm a ideational or cognitive hoarder. I hoard ideas, I collect, and I still have collections within collections, much of which I'll never use. I don't know, it's just one thing after another. But let's go to our text after a half an hour being late. So, we're in one of the most difficult passages in the entire Bible, and this is in James chapter 2. And it was this text that actually made Martin Luther call James a right strawy epistle, an epistle of straw. Why did he do that? Well, Luther's great insight that he was given as an Augustinian monk, and he's studying and teaching, and as he's teaching the scriptures, he comes to this insight of salvation, that the just shall live by faith. And it is by grace through faith that a person comes to salvation. So before we look at the James 2, just to contextualize
What verse?
James 2.
I'm going to go to.
Chapter 2:14.
Yeah. But I'm going to go to Romans just briefly, because it's important for us to see this context here. So this verse, Romans 1:17, is a very critical verse, and it was for many. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God for salvation, everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. In it, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, but the righteous man shall live by faith. And that's a quote from Habakkuk. And it's used in Galatians as well. And that
What chapter verse? That was Romans.
I was saying it was Romans 1:17.
You're saying Habakkuk.
Just in general.
It's Habakkuk 2, I think it's 14, I don't know.
He's quoting
I'm quoting,
Habakkuk
I don't have it in front of me. I'm quoting, he's quoting Habakkuk in Romans 1:17. The idea here is that the righteous man shall live by faith, and it is by grace through faith that we are therefore saved. And then in Romans chapter 3, he builds this case where he says that all have fall short of the glory of God. There's none righteous, not even one. He's quoting from various Psalms and so forth. And Chester, I'm not going to give you the Psalms. You'll have to look that up. But he quotes various Psalms. And then he says he says that we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, that every mouth may be closed and all the world may become accountable to God. Because by the works of the law, this is Romans 3:20, no flesh will be justified in his sight. Through the law comes the knowledge of sin. Very important principle that Luther finally came to grasp, that the law was never revealed to save anybody. It was not its intention. The law reveals the holy standards and character of God. The law drives us to faith because, frankly, if you were thinking you were doing pretty well, and most people have this notion, if God's fair, he'll grade in a curve. You know, I'm better than most people. The law reveals that God doesn't grade in a curve, and that we all fall short of the glory of God. And so this whole point that he's stressing here is, then continuing, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all those who believe. For there's no distinction, for here's his summary. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So the law reveals our problem. Paul says, I thought I was doing well until I saw, thought about the commandment, you shall not covet. But then I realized, actually, I had coveting of every kind, and so I was not able to keep the law. And so the law was driving us to grace through faith. And the concept here, Hayes, good to have your brief presence, even if it was for
You know what, I had to stay for at least one verse.
You got your verse. Okay.
Oh, wait a minute, let me just say one thing. Hayes Wilson, okay.
And I travel with that guy.
Yeah, that's great.
So Paul's driving our point home is the Jew and the Gentile, they all stand condemned, they all fall short of the glory of God. So if God gave us justice, we'd all stand condemned. So we ask, God's not being just. Don't ask for that. If you got what you deserved, we would all be in a Christless eternity. That's just the reality. The scriptures are very clear that human nature shares the fall and the fallenness of Adam, the Adamic nature, and even our best deeds can be tainted. So the question then is going to be, if this is the case, if God's just, if that's what would happen, then what's our hope? We don't have any hope. No one can keep the law. Just read Leviticus and you'll be very frustrated if you discover, and really thinking about it, there are no sacrifices for willful, intentional, premeditated sins. Interesting. How would we be doing in that culture? There are no sacrifices. They're only for unintentional sins, or you realize you did something wrong. I don't think I do very well in that kind of a deal. Now what am I going to do? I have no way out.
Meaning there's no way to atone for those sins?
No, because there are no sacrifices. It's astonishing when you read that book, you realize the kinds of sins they're talking about are not presumptuous, intentional kinds of actions, but unintentional, or you realize. Well, frankly, I don't know. The sacrifice system, that system wouldn't work at all for me. And indeed, when David committed his acts concerning Bathsheba and Uriah, he then confesses. We'll go to that for just a moment to see in Psalm 51, because this is his own realization. So in Psalm 51, he has now been confronted by Nathan the prophet, and we have the superscription for the choir director of Psalm of David. When Nathan the prophet came to him after he had gone into Bathsheba, by the way, that's for the choir director, that superscription is part of the inspired text. So in the Hebrew, it's the first verse. In ours, it's not. But that's actually, so we actually are given in the text the context, but it was pretty clear. You could read from it. It's a psalm of contrition. Be gracious to me, O God, according to your loving kindness, according to your chesed is the word, and it means loyal love or covenant love, or it's what we'd say your agape in the New Testament. It is your covenant love that loves us in spite of ourselves. According to the greatness of your compassion, blot out my transgressions, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity. What's he appealing to? To the law? No, he's appealing to God's grace, to his mercy, to his compassion. He says, I know my sin, I know my transgressions, my sins ever before you. Before me, against you, you only I have sinned and done what is evil in your sight. well, wait a minute, didn't he sin against Bathsheba and Uriah? Surely he did, but at the end of the day, all sins are against God. And so his point is that this is something now I have no options for. He says, I was brought forth in iniquity. He's talking about the condition of human depravity. And he said, purify me. But he goes on to say, create in me a clean heart, renew a steadfast spirit with him. But he goes on to say further down, he said, you're not pleased with burnt offering. He says, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. It says, and he says, you don't delight in sacrifice, otherwise I'd give it. What he's saying here isn't there isn't one. Consider the law and just take the Ten Commandments. How many did David break in that context, in that action with Uriah and with Bathsheba?
First 4, right?
Surely,
And then
not the Sabbath part,
murder and
but
adultery.
the last half of it.
5.
Quite about, at least 5 of them. He committed adultery, he lied, he murdered, he coveted. We got that going.
Put something
He
before
stole,
God.
he stole at 5.
False witness.
Say, put something before God.
Yeah, which he did. He had something before God. I'd say he's not doing well when you look at the law. How's he doing? The law, then, a man is then condemned, wiped out. Now, if you really think carefully, all of us are lawbreakers, even if you don't literally commit adultery. You do it when you, in your mind. You see the concept there? That's why Jesus says, it's not just a man who looks, but it's, if he looks to lust after, he's already committed adultery. I've given you this before, C.S. Lewis's little witty statement. He says, if a man who looks at a plate of bacon and eggs, let's see, with hunger, has committed breakfast with it in his heart. He's committed breakfast. Clever. You get the idea. If you hate your brother, you're a murderer. Have you ever stolen anything in your life? Ever? I think all of us have.
Yeah.
So we are thieves then. We've all stolen. Have we ever said an untruth? Ever? And if you say no, then you just did one. So we're thieves, we're murderers, we're adulterers, we're liars. You get the point. That's why Jesus elevated the standard in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, you've heard it said, but I say to you, it's not just your action, it's your thoughts that'll also nail you. You see.
Well, you know, I think what's even scarier than that, and I didn't understand this for a long time, but I think I've come to understand it more in one of your daily reflections is show me areas of unconfessed sin.
Yes.
And I've also seen show me areas of hidden sin.
Mhm.
And so the scary thing is that we're committing these sins and we don't even have a consciousness of it.
No, you're beneath the waterline.
I mean, and so, you know, it's like in criminal law, you've got this thing called mens rea, and you've got to have an intention to commit a crime, but we don't even know that we're sinning a lot of times.
Lots of times, there's stuff under the waterline, things that you don't even know you're doing, and then later on you realize you're now convicted about a behavior that didn't affect you before. And once you've got that conviction, then now you can't engage in that. Sometimes what happens is you become aware of the stuff there was problems, but it was not revealed. You weren't ready for it.
So in Old Testament, you had the law, you had the sacrificial
Yes.
recovery. So was there a concept of forgiveness for intentional sins?
Here's what happened. On the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, once a year, the high priest, it's the only day anyone was allowed to go into the most holy place. And there he would offer a sacrifice for the sins of the people, and it would be on top of he would sprinkle the blood actually on the mercy seat. The mercy seat was this thick slab of gold between the Ark of the Covenant, which was in the, so that was in like a golden box, as it were. The Ark had that, and it had the law inside of it. It had the law. It also had Aaron's the buds the buds that bloomed. Remember that, and also the manna. Eventually, just the tablets of the law. But the law would be there, and then the mercy seat was on top of it. And when the blood was sprinkled, it was as though the blood covered between the demands of the law and the work of God. So God sees the blood, and he puts off the debt for another year. So he'd actually put off the combined debt of the people for yet another year, again and again. And the weight would get heavier and heavier and heavier. So they had these three systems. You had a sacrificial system, you had a central sanctuary, you had a priesthood. And that was all anticipatory of the work of one who would come, who when he offered himself, it was never necessary for any further sacrifices to be made. So how would a man be saved? David was not saved by keeping the law or by works. Romans 6, going back to our Romans text for a moment, and this is clear in throughout as well. Go to our Romans text for just a moment here.
What verse?
Give me a chance. I have to go to give me a chance. Be patient, Chester, please. Okay? So I'm going to Romans chapter 4, and then I'll tell you where I'll be. So in Romans 4:1, when we say that Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh is sound, has found if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about. Not before God. No one's justified by works. What does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, it was credited to him as righteousness. That's the key concept. So he believed. The one who works, his wage is not credited as a favor, but what is due. But for the one who doesn't work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is credited as righteousness. And then we go to our text right here. Just as David also speaks of the blessing on the man to whom God credits righteousness apart from works. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds have been forgiven and whose sins have been covered. Blessed is the man whose sin the Lord will not take into account. So he's actually taking this idea of what we just saw in this psalm, and there's other psalms that discuss this, and he says that it is, in fact, salvation was done as a result of grace through faith, not works. That's the concept. The law was a schoolmaster to drive us to faith, to trusting in God. God, I can't do it, and so I appeal to your mercy, your loving kindness. And thus, Abraham, they believed God. Remember, when it says justifies, the idea of justified would be declared righteous. So, it is not our righteousness. The law anticipates the work of Christ. So this concept then that is very clear in Romans, very, very clear indeed. In fact, Romans chapter 3, a little bit later, has been very clear, especially in verses 21 to 31. So he says, when he says all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, this goes back to Adam, being justified as a gift by his grace through his redemption which is in Christ. And the idea here is that this is something that God has done. So if this is true, then how, going to our text in front of us, but going back to James 2, where we saw beginning in verse 14, James seems to be contradicting that at first blush. Here's what he says. What use is it, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but has no works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and be filled, and yet you do not give them what is necessary for the body, what use is that? Even so, he says, faith, if it has no works, is dead being by itself. But someone may well say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without the works. I'll show you my faith by my works. You believe that God is one, you do well. The demons also believe and shudder. But are you willing to recognize, you foolish fellow, that faith without works is useless? Was not Abraham our father justified by works? Here's the thing. Didn't Paul just say he was justified by faith? Here he says he's justified by works. You see what appears at first blush to be a contradiction of what we've just been seeing. So he goes, wasn't he justified by works when he offered up Isaac, his son, on the altar? You see that faith was working with his works, and as a result of the works, faith was perfected. And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, and Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness, that very text we looked at earlier. And he was called a friend of God. You see that a man is justified by works and not by faith alone. In the same way was not Rahab the harlot. Interesting choice. You got Abraham, the patriarch, and then you got this harlot. The poor woman is known in history as Rahab the harlot forever. That'd be like Bill the adulterer. That's his name. Everyone knows him. Was she not justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? Just as the body is without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead. How do you reconcile those two is the dilemma. And of course, Luther construed this as being a direct contradiction of Pauline theology, particularly this phrase, justified by works and not by faith alone. And so we don't have much time, but I'll try to solve the dilemma for you. We can discuss it next time if you like. But here's how I believe this is solved, and it makes good sense for a lot of reasons, as you'll see. That it's not to say that they're contradicting each other. A faith that is alive is a faith that will work. And if you have a faith and have no works, if there's no change in your life, one is justified in questioning whether you have the real thing. Profession without practice. So profession is one thing, possession is another. What's interesting is he's using the example of Abraham believed God and was reckoned to him as righteousness, which occurred 30 years approximately before he offered up Isaac. Abraham was saved by grace through faith when he believed God and was reckoned to him as righteousness. But decades later, he offered up his son. And so he says, was not Abraham justified when he offered up Isaac, his son, on the altar? What's that saying? The man was saved by grace through faith, but the action was a manifestation of that faith in action. Now there were many faith steps that he made. But the concept here is that a faith that is alive is a faith that will work. James has been talking about people who are and how would another person know that you were truly a follower of Jesus? Would it be by your profession or by your possession? Would it be by your claims or by your life? Do you see the idea? How would you be justified in the sight of another person? It would not be by your claim, but it would be there'd be evidence that it's real. In other words, if there's actually change in a person's life, then others would then see that there's evidence for your salvation. So I think that Paul is talking about justification before God, James before people. See where there'd be a difference then? If we're talking about before God, nobody is justified, because we all fall short of the glory of God. Every one of us violates God's requirements, his law. Every one of us. And now, but how would another person, if you were saying, you have faith, but I have works, show me your faith without the works, I'll show you my faith by my works. If I'm going to if another person's to be convinced of that I have the real thing, it would not be by my claim, but by my actions. So it's a very different audience that they're addressing. Before people, your faith is manifested by works. And a faith without works is dead. If it's a real faith, it will bear fruit of one sort or another. And it's the fruit that others would see, and they will know them by their fruit. But before God, who looks at the heart, no one is justified by their works. It is by grace through faith. Now, the faith and the justification, the life of Christ that's now in us, and his life is now in us, and therefore we have the Holy Spirit. We have a new source of power within us that can affect our behaviors and bear fruit. So if it's the real thing, there should be some genuine change.
I remember growing up in the 70s, one of those cliche things you'd often hear was, if you were put on trial for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you?
Exactly right. I remember I had a little card like that. It had, that was in the back of it, and the front part had the word Jesus, and then with the letters, and then you couldn't see it at first, then you realized it was Jesus.
Okay, yeah.
It was a clever little card, but that's a good question. Would there be enough evidence to convict you? So how would another person know that you had the real thing? Would it be by your profession or by your practice?
Practice.
Clearly. That's what James is talking about. In the context, he's been discussing that very matter. So, but no, he's not, I don't believe, contradicting Pauline theology at all. He's saying that it is grace through faith, and that at the end of the day, and that's why he said earlier, by the way, he says, remember this, he said, looking at the law, whoever keeps the whole law, verse 10, and yet stumbles in one point, has been found guilty of all. It only takes one. So if you have a chain of 613 positive and negative commandments, that's the way it was numbered, not later in the Talmud, but they had this list of commandments, and you're hanging on this chain here, and you're above, you're a precipice. You're holding onto this chain. How many links would need to break?
One.
One will do. That's the image here. And so only any one would do. So if I'm doing well here, but you have a problem there, we all are condemned. The law was never revealed to give us grace through faith, to give us salvation, but to reveal our need. Galatians chapter 3 and 1, and I'm talking more than I usually do, but I just want to. Abraham believed God, and I'm looking at Galatians, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Same quote, same idea. That is, those who are of faith are the sons of Abraham. For Scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel before him to Abraham, saying, all the nations will be blessed in you. So he goes on to say, now that no one is justified by the law before God is evident, for the righteous man shall live by faith. Did you hear that before? That was that text from Habakkuk 2. The righteous shall live by faith. However, the law is not of faith. On the contrary, he who practices them will live by them. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. As it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs in a tree. So he bore the curse of the cross, and even being on a tree, he's cursed by being on a tree is the imagery there.
What verse is that in Galatians?
Restrain yourself, my friend. I cannot constantly give you every verse I'm
Read the whole chapter.
You read the chapter. It's in chapter 3. You'll find it. That'll be your own study. So cursed is everyone who hangs in a tree. What else did he wear on his head?
Crown of thorns.
What was that relate? What's that remind you of? The curse in Genesis 3. It'll be thorns and thistles. Now that was actually part of the curse. Did you ever connect the two together? The idea before there would be no thorns and thistles. Now thorns and thistles. The ground is cursed, and so he's bearing the sign of the curse right on his head.
He became total sin.
It became total sin.
At that moment.
At that point. And so this concept here, he's demonstrating there, it's not because of the law, and that is this, he became sin for us. And so the other text that I would want to give to you is the one that you're just alluding to, and this is 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. You like that, Chester?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not going to give you every verse, though.
Okay, I'm
Don't
gonna
demand
There'll be a
that.
quiz next week.
There'll be a quiz.
on all the verses.
I'll give you the chapter, but I'm not always going to give you the verse. All you have to have is a book and chapter, and that's enough. That's really all you really need, book and chapter. You can find the rest. He made him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf. Do you remember this? We've done this multiple times, this verse. So we might become the righteousness of God in him. So while he's on the cross, he becomes sin. He becomes what he was not, so that we could become what we were not. So this powerful word here, it's another way of looking at it. It's Luther's prayer. Let me see if I can get this for you here.
I was gonna say, one of my favorite sayings I repeat has often been one of those of St. Francis of Assisi, where he said, preach the gospel at all times and when necessary, use words.
Yeah, so your life is the gospel, your epistle written and known by men. Martin Luther, Lord Jesus, you are my righteousness, I am your sin. You took on you what was mine, you set on me what was yours. You became what you were not, that I might become what I was not. So he's, in a pithy way, summarizes that very meaning of 2 Corinthians 5:21. He became, so his thoughts, words, and deeds, remember that chart that I gave you before, that was, his thoughts, words, and deeds were righteous before God. And this idea, let me see if I can find it here, 2 Corinthians here, 5, yes. So thoughts, this chart here, we've done this before. If I look at Christ as thoughts, words, and deeds, they add up to righteousness. If I add up my thoughts, words, and deeds, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We're together on that? And maybe some people are better than others, but we all fall short. Now, here's what happened. He took my account, which adds up to sin, and it was put on his account when he was on the cross. That's half of it. The other half, he took his account, righteousness, which perfectly fulfills the requirements of the law. He did not come to violate the law. He came to fulfill the law and make it possible for us now to satisfy the requirements of the law, because his righteousness is now yours. So he sees now there's no longer need for sacrifices for sins. All that anticipated the work of Christ, but now you have him in your heart. That's the new covenant. In the Old Testament, in Jeremiah 31 and 31, it says, I'm going to give you a new covenant. The law is no longer going to be external, it's going to be in your heart, and Christ is in you. So he took his righteousness and put it on you. That's why I say that's the best deal you'll ever get. Because he's taking your sin on himself. He becomes an adulterer. He becomes a thief. He becomes a murderer. He becomes a liar. And that's why, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because the Father cannot abide the presence of sin. There's deep mysteries here. But the only way it would be possible for God to justify people who are unworthy would be to buy, and without compromising his standard, is to bear the price himself. God cannot forgive sin. He can only forgive sinners. You see the difference? He cannot forgive sin, because if he didn't, if he forgave sin without some consequence, it would not be a moral universe. But he can forgive sin if he buys the price himself. So he can be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Christ. So that's the idea. I know I chatted a lot more than I planned to, but it's a hard, the reason why I did that is because it's such a darn hard passage, I'll be honest with you.
Why does Martin Luther want to throw that out?
Because he construed
He was just so stuck on
incorrectly.
Romans.
He thought, he was so big on justification by grace through faith, he construed James as saying, hey, wait, he's saying you're justified by works. No, you're justified before men by works. But James, he didn't see that distinction, where Paul's talking about justifying before God, so he couldn't put the two together, so he thought that James was really not accurate.
Everybody
That's the
understand it now?
Yeah.
I think it would be good to come back to this.
It's a hard,
the next
I
time.
totally concur that it's a very tough passage. That's why I felt I had to say so much, because if I didn't, it would be fresh and about. It's just a lot of reflection goes on this. So, but my point is that James is right on the money. If you have Jesus, there will be a difference. And if there's never a change in your life, if you can still sin with, I'm sorry, I know, just a second. If you can still sin with impunity, the stuff I did, it didn't bother me one whit when I was doing it. When I was, but since then I came to faith, I said, my gosh, I'm worse now than I ever thought I was. Why? Because now I have the Spirit in me convicting me of sin righteous. Suddenly I realize. So now I can't do something without conviction. I can't do it with that kind of attitude. There's a change. Also, it gave me an appetite for Scripture, which I didn't have before, and things of that sort. Those kinds of changes take place. So I think that's what we're dealing with here. But it's a hard one.
Which is a good segue. So Ken is not going to be here next week, the 24th. And so maybe y'all can chew on what we've talked about today for a couple of weeks, then we'll visit again when he's back. And I mentioned this to y'all who were here when I led a few weeks ago. Next week, I'd like to do something different, and I'm glad we've got a big group today, and I hope y'all will indulge me in this. What I'd like to do next week is, I've had a couple of people tell me that I hadn't really gotten to know the guys, other than kind of sitting here and just listening for an hour. So what I'd like to do next week, not more than 1 or 2 minutes, 3 minutes per man, but have everybody kind of go around and tell the group a little bit about yourself, whatever is on your heart, what you do, about your family, stuff that's on your heart like that, and things of that nature. And that way, at least for a minute or two, we'll kind of hear from the guys, and it'll kind of give you a sense of who's who, rather than kind of just seeing these faces and going around and saying names this week. And I know some will say, well, I don't want to do that, but I hope y'all will embrace that. Next, Ken has got a matching donor again this year, up until the end of September. And so, as y'all are thinking about giving, between now and the end of next month is a great time to do it because it'll be matched dollar for dollar during that time period. And then lastly, just for me on a personal level, I would appreciate y'all's prayers for my daughter, Sarah. I wasn't here last week. I delivered her to college. And,
Delivered her to college. I like that. Delivered her to the Philistines.
And she's in, she's in the Lord's hands, obviously, but just, sort of finding her way, some homesickness and anxiety. So I would appreciate y'all's prayers for her.
Where's she in school?
Georgia College in Milledgeville. So I would appreciate that. Any other announcements or prayer requests?
Ken, you sent out an email that you have an event coming up, and I don't quite remember what it is. It just went out yesterday.
Oh, yeah. I'll send that out to Chuck, and she can send it to the group as well. It's a very unusual thing. I've never heard of anyone in this situation, and now I've done it 3 times in a row. This is the 3rd time. This Orthodox Conference. It's at the Holy Transfiguration Greek Orthodox Church. They never invite Protestants to come to speak to them. I still never forget the first night I was there. I was like, who is this guy and why is he here? Man, the pushback I felt from the audience was palpable. This is my 3rd time, so it must be going okay.
Is that the church on Claremont Road? That big Greek church?
It's a big one. I don't know. It's in Marietta.
Oh, Marietta, no, okay.
It's called Holy Transfiguration, Greek Orthodox. And so this is my 3rd time there. So it's a wholly different angle, and I approach it very differently. And I'm going to be synthesizing some of the Greek patristics, which...
What's that?
Greek patristics are the Greek fathers. They're big on the Greek fathers rather than the Western fathers for various reasons. And I don't want to go into that, the difference in the angle. Yeah.
Prayer requests for 2 families. This was a weird week. 2 people that were sort of mentors to me. One guy, Dr. John Barnes, who was in our Buckhead Lions group, passed away this week. And then also a really great guy, a guy named Bill Nordmark, who was the founder of the Atlanta Friendship Initiative, was in my Rotary Club, and he passed away. He had brain aneurysm. So 2 great guys. Bill was an incredible Christian, and he was head of the Interfaith Prayer Breakfast that's held downtown each year. And he was the organizer, just a fantastic guy. Anyway, unexpected. Prayers for both those families.
My business partner, his mother is suffering from severe depression, and she lives in Israel, and he had to take off for an emergency trip, and she got to her life, so he's obviously very, very upset.
What's your partner's name?
Downtown.
Mike.
I appreciate it if you continue to pray for Dr. Chris North. He's still in sub-intensive after his quadruple bypass. And then I would like to appeal to y'all to pray for Saturday afternoon that there not be a big storm in Tucker, because we worked 2 months very hard to have a kickoff for Dr. Joe Prophet, who's a Christian guy who's decided to take on, is on the ballot against Hank Johnson in November. And we hope that the Lord will give us favor in regard to the weather.
All right. Anybody else?
Yeah, just a quick update. Chuck sent around a prayer request for my son's best friend Ryder, had meningitis. Was in children's, admitted Sunday, so he was released Wednesday, is at home, still dealing with fever and nausea, but able to keep down the medicines and food and fluids, so on his way to recovery. And his family appreciates the prayers.
Anyone else? All right, we're way late, so we're going to forego the names today.
Oh,
Gary, would you close us out? Sorry, Chester, we're way behind.
Sorry.
We'll get to the chapter verse later.
Amen. Let's go to God. God, you heard the men. You heard our prayers. God, give us favor. God, we understand that anytime that someone is sick and
You know, you have a little one, a kid that's, you know, in a situation where you can't control anything, then the only person that can is you. God, we thank you for all of the blessings that have gone around this table. We also thank you for all of the things that you will heal in those who need healing, whether it's mental, whether it's physical. God, you take care of us in every way. You are your God. You are our God, all by yourself. Your Son's Spirit we pray. Amen.